At 2 a.m., cops kicked in a black woman's door, but when their flashlights froze on the FBI jacket hanging on her wall, they had no idea they just destroyed their own careers. It was 2 in the morning when the quiet street shattered apart. A single thunderous crash ripped through the silence as a front door splintered inward, wood exploding into jagged shards across the floor. 3 officers stormed through the wreckage in formation, their boots pounding against the hardwood like a war drum. Flashlights carved long white blades through the darkness, cutting the shadows into pieces. The first man barked commands, his voice sharp and merciless, echoing off the walls of the modest home. "Hands! Show us your hands!" The second officer moved with a hand already near his holster, every muscle taut, eyes darting for threats. The third, their captain, lingered just behind, surveying with a cold precision that said this raid was no accident. The bedroom exploded with light as the beams of 3 flashlights converged on a single figure. A woman jolted upright from sleep, sheets tangling at her legs, her body exposed under a thin tank top. The sudden glare blinded her, throwing her into momentary panic. She raised her hands slowly, instinctively, her breathing quick and shallow. The barked orders piled on top of each other, drowning out the stillness of night. "Get up. Don't move. Stay where you are." The room that had been silent seconds before now pulsed with violence. Drawers yanked open. Clothes tossed into the air. Furniture slammed against the wall. It was a storm of movement, as if 3 men had brought the weight of an entire city's suspicion into her bedroom. The detective's boot crunched on the splintered remains of the doorframe still clinging to his sole. His flashlight beam raked across the floor, the bed, her face. Then it froze. On the far wall, half hidden in the dim, hung a navy blue jacket. The golden letters stitched across its back caught the light. FBI. For one long, unbroken breath, no one moved. The detective's light stayed fixed on that jacket, steady as stone. The sergeant's breathing changed, deeper, heavier, betraying something he did not say aloud. The captain's eyes narrowed, lines tightening around his mouth. The silence lasted only 3 seconds, but it stretched like a lifetime. The jacket loomed on the wall, not just fabric but a silent witness, a declaration that whoever lived here was not ordinary prey. The air itself seemed to shift, the heat of adrenaline curdling into doubt. The 3 men exchanged no words, yet the weight of recognition settled in their chests. Still, they pressed forward, as if momentum alone could drown out the reality hanging in gold letters before them. The woman squinted through the glare, her body trembling more from the sudden invasion than from fear. Her lips parted as though to speak, but she stayed silent, reading their faces as carefully as they read hers. They expected a civilian, terrified, screaming, broken by power. What they saw instead was someone frozen in calculation. Her eyes tracked their movements, not with panic but with precision, as if she were taking inventory. The detective swallowed hard and forced his voice into the room again, harsher now, compensating for the unease. "Don't look at me. Keep those hands up." He pushed forward, brushing past the edge of the bed, the beam of his flashlight never fully leaving the jacket. The sergeant tore through her dresser, rattling wooden drawers, tossing aside personal belongings. The captain lingered at the doorway, one hand on his radio, but he did not call it in. Outside, the neighborhood remained silent, unaware that inside this small house the story was already beginning to fracture. What was supposed to be a routine raid, a simple exercise of power, had shifted into dangerous territory. The golden letters glowed faintly in the light, an unspoken threat to everything they thought they controlled. The woman's chest rose and fell as she steadied her breathing. The officers shouted louder, as if volume could cover the fear threading its way into the night. In that room, at that hour, the balance of power teetered on a knife's edge. They believed they had found their suspect, a woman caught off guard, vulnerable and unarmed. But the truth hung on the wall in plain sight, daring them to notice what they had already seen. It was the kind of detail that changes everything, the kind that makes seasoned men hesitate even when their weapons are drawn. They had kicked in the wrong door at the wrong time. And though none of them dared admit it, they had also kicked open something much larger, something waiting to swallow them whole. The room was chaos now, every surface overturned, every drawer hanging open, clothes scattered across the floor like discarded evidence. The detective rifled through her nightstand with practiced speed, too practiced, as if he had rehearsed this search 100 times before. The sergeant moved heavier, pulling down boxes from her closet, scattering shoes and papers across the carpet. The captain stayed in the doorway, his arms crossed, silent, watching. The woman sat straighter on her bed, her hands still raised where they could see them, her breathing calm now, steadier than the men expected. She was not screaming, not pleading, not broken. She was watching. Her eyes locked on the sergeant's badge, the number gleaming faintly under the flashlight beam. She repeated it in her mind, etched it into memory. Then she shifted her gaze to the digital clock glowing red on her nightstand. 2:17 a.m. She logged the time as if writing it in an invisible report. Every second mattered. The detective's hand slipped something into her purse, a movement too smooth, too deliberate. Then, almost theatrically, he pulled it back out. A small bag of white powder glimmered under the flashlight's harsh light. "Well, well," he said, his voice rising with false triumph. "Look what we have here." The woman did not flinch. Her lips curved into the faintest suggestion of a smile that was not joy but recognition. She had seen this before. She had expected this. Her voice came low, steady, cutting through the noise. "Confirm your body cameras are recording." The words froze the air for a beat. The sergeant's hand moved instinctively to his chest rig. The red light blinked. Still recording. His eyes flickered with something almost human, hesitation. The detective snarled, annoyed that she dared interrupt his performance. "Don't play games, lady. You think anyone will believe you over us?" The woman tilted her head slightly, her tone never rising. "Every word you speak, every action you take, it's being preserved. Federal court accepts video evidence." Her calm unnerved them more than any scream could have. The sergeant looked away, his jaw tightening, his breath quickening. For the first time, a crack in the armor. The captain finally spoke, his voice even, commanding. "Ma'am, we received reports of drug activity at this address." "From whom?" she asked, sharp and immediate. "What specific probable cause justified a no-warrant forced entry?" The three men exchanged glances, none wanting to answer. The sergeant recovered first, his tone defensive. "Anonymous tip. Said you were dealing." She nodded slowly, as if checking off a list. "Anonymous tips don't justify searches of private residences. That's Mapp vs. Ohio, 1961. Her words landed like small hammers. Each case name struck harder than shouting ever could. The detective's jaw tightened, his mask of authority slipping just slightly. Most people in her position would panic, cry, beg for mercy. She was doing none of that. She was dissecting their moves with surgical precision, recording every violation in her mind. She noted the sergeant's shaky hands as he dug deeper into the closet. She noticed the way the detective positioned the bag of powder in the beam of light, like an actor hitting his mark. She saw the captain's silence, the way his eyes lingered not on her but on the jacket hanging on the wall. They all saw it. None of them could admit it. The woman's voice broke the silence again, calm and clinical. "I will need all of your badge numbers before you leave." The sergeant snapped his head toward her, anger covering fear. "You're not in a position to make demands." But she did not retreat. Every citizen has the right to identify officers conducting searches. She said it like a fact, not an argument, and repeated it until the room felt smaller for the men standing in it. This was no ordinary target. No terrified civilian who could be silenced with intimidation. They had kicked in a door expecting weakness, but they had found something else entirely. Someone who spoke in the language of law, who carried herself like a witness, not a victim. And though they did not know it yet, every second of their performance was already slipping out of their control. The metal cuffs bit into her wrists with unnecessary force, the detective snapping them shut until the skin pinched. He yanked her from the bed, dragging her across the wreckage they had created, the sharp crunch of broken wood and shattered glass under their boots. The sergeant shoved a chair out of the way with his knee, clearing a path through the chaos, while the captain muttered into his radio, his words clipped, urgent, and low. The woman kept her spine straight, her chin lifted. Pain flickered at her wrists, but her voice was steady, cutting through the sound of destruction like a scalpel. I am being arrested based on planted evidence. This is an unlawful search without probable cause. Every violation you commit is being documented. She spoke directly toward the blinking body cameras on their chests, knowing the red light meant her words were captured, preserved, undeniable. The detective's jaw clenched tighter with every sentence, his grip rougher, as if physical force could silence the law spilling from her mouth. They pulled her through the hallway and out into the cold night. Porch lights glowed faintly on the quiet street, neighbors peering through blinds, shadows shifting behind curtains. The scene looked ordinary from the outside, but in her eyes it was a battlefield. She catalogued every detail, the exact time on the cruiser's dashboard clock, the way the sergeant's hand trembled as he pushed her forward, the captain's silence when she requested a supervisor. Each detail was a brick in a wall she was already building against them. At the patrol car, the detective shoved her down roughly, forcing her into the back seat. The cuffs cut deeper as he pressed her against the metal frame. I did not consent to this search, she said clearly, projecting her words so the microphones would pick them up. I request immediate legal counsel. The sergeant cursed under his breath, slamming the door behind her. Move, lady. Just shut up. But her voice carried on, steady as stone. Every unlawful action you take is part of the record. The detective slid into the driver's seat, the sergeant taking shotgun, the captain following in a second car. The partition separated her from them, but not their words. She watched their faces in the rearview mirror, studying the flickers of doubt breaking through their hardened exteriors. The radio crackled with dispatch calls, domestic disturbance on 5th, traffic stop on Main, but inside the car, the real noise was their whispered argument. You think she knows? The sergeant asked, his voice low, uneasy. The detective kept his eyes on the road. Knows what? About the investigation. His tone carried too much weight to be casual. The word hung heavy in the air. The woman's eyes narrowed slightly, her breathing slow. There it was. Confirmation. This raid wasn't random. This wasn't about drugs or noise complaints. She was no accident. She was a target. The detective's hands tightened on the wheel. She can't know about that. She's just some smart mouth who thinks quoting law books makes her special. But his words lacked conviction, his voice cracking with something close to fear. The sergeant shifted in his seat, glancing back at her through the partition. She met his gaze without flinching. The silence that followed said more than their whispers ever could. From the back seat, the woman repeated calmly for the body cam, I am under arrest for possession based on planted evidence. This is a false arrest. I request a review of all body camera footage. The detective slammed a hand against the wheel. Shut her up. She's not shutting up, the sergeant muttered. She's building a case. The captain's voice came over the radio from the trailing car, clipped and sharp. Just process her. We'll sort it out at the station. The woman leaned back against the hard seat, cuffs digging into her wrists, but her eyes steady, her mind sharper than ever. They thought they had taken control, but every word, every careless admission, every slip of the tongue was another weapon in her hands. In the glow of the dashboard lights, the word investigation still lingered like smoke, proof that this night was about more than they wanted her, or anyone, to believe. The fluorescent lights in the evidence room hummed overhead, steady and cold, casting everything in a pale gray glow. Officer Sarah Johnson sat alone at the console, her hands hovering over the keyboard, her eyes fixed on the body cameras charging in their docks. One after another, small green lights blinked, silent sentinels holding whatever had been captured tonight. Johnson inserted the first device into the terminal. The screen came alive with grainy footage. She leaned forward, her pulse quickening. The video played back the moment the front door crashed inward, wood exploding, voices shouting, flashlights slicing through darkness. She hit pause, then rewind, then slow motion. Her stomach knotted tighter with each frame. She saw the woman on the bed, hands raised, calm voice requesting a warrant. She saw the detective move her purse, slide something inside, then moments later pull it out as if it had always been there. A small plastic bag catching the beam of light. Johnson froze the frame. She had heard rumors before. Whispers in hallways about planted evidence, quiet jokes at roll call that didn't feel like jokes. But now it wasn't a rumor. It was on her screen. Recorded on her watch. Her phone buzzed on the table, a new text message lighting up. Delete the footage. Equipment malfunction. The words glowed sharp in the sterile light, carrying the weight of an order disguised as routine. Her throat tightened. These were her colleagues, men who had trained her, backed her up on dangerous calls, shared beers after shift. They always said, "We look out for each other. We don't break the chain." She stared at the frozen image on her screen, the detective's hand slipping the evidence into the purse. Looking out for each other now meant covering a crime. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the mouse. Delete, just like they asked, and the footage would vanish into a void where no one could prove anything. She would be safe. Her career would stay intact. No questions, no enemies. But another voice pressed harder in her head. Safe for who? Certainly not the woman now in custody, handcuffed on false charges. Not the dozens of others who might have been trapped by the same trick. Johnson rewound the footage again, her eyes catching on the woman's face. No panic. No begging. Just cold calculation, like someone gathering evidence. The way she requested badge numbers. The way she cited case law by memory. Johnson leaned closer. This wasn't normal. This wasn't random. She ran the woman's name through the internal system, hesitating before hitting enter. The screen loaded. And then Johnson's blood froze. Federal agent. 15 years of service. Current assignment, Public Corruption Unit. Her chair squeaked as she pushed back, suddenly aware of the enormity of what she had just uncovered. The woman wasn't a civilian caught in the wrong sweep. She was FBI. Not just FBI, but the exact kind of agent who investigates departments like theirs. Johnson's chest tightened. She could feel her heart hammering in her throat. The phone buzzed again. Delete it. Now. She closed her eyes, her mind a battlefield. Loyalty. Justice. Career. Conscience. She thought of her father, a cop before her, who used to tell her that the badge meant service, not protection. She thought of academy training, the lectures about ethics, the promise she swore under oath. She thought of the woman on the screen, calm under cuffs, demanding the truth be recorded. Her hands moved before she could stop them. She pulled up her contacts, scrolled to the one number every officer memorized but hoped never to use. The FBI tip line. She hesitated for one last breath, the weight of betrayal heavy on her chest, then pressed call. The line clicked alive. Federal Bureau of Investigation, the voice answered, crisp and professional. "This is Officer Johnson, Metro Police," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to report that we have a federal agent in custody." The silence on the other end stretched thin. When the voice spoke again, it carried a sharp edge. "Repeat that." Johnson swallowed hard. "We arrested a federal agent tonight. She's with the Public Corruption Unit. I have body camera proof the drugs were planted. The typing on the other end came fast, urgent. Name: Diana Marshall. More typing, faster still. Where is she now? Holding cell. They're processing her on possession charges. Johnson's voice faltered, but she forced the truth out. The charges are false. The drugs were planted. I saw it myself. The FBI agent's voice sharpened further. Do not delete that footage. Do you understand? Keep her safe. We're sending a team. The line went dead. Johnson sat frozen in the sterile room, surrounded by humming chargers and blinking lights. She looked again at the paused frame on her screen, the detective's hand caught mid-plant, undeniable. For the first time in her career, she wasn't sure who her family was anymore. But she knew one thing clearly. Tonight she had chosen justice over loyalty. And there was no turning back. The interrogation room was small, square, and suffocating. Gray walls, a single metal table bolted to the floor, a buzzing fluorescent bulb overhead that flickered just enough to make the silence unbearable. The woman sat with her hands still cuffed, posture straight, eyes steady. Across from her the detective dropped a thick folder onto the table with a thud, papers spilling across the steel surface like an accusation made visible. He spread them out one by one, fabricated surveillance notes, fictional informant statements, false evidence chains written with the confidence of someone who had done this before. He leaned forward, his voice low but sharp. These reports say you've been dealing for months. Your neighbors saw it. Anonymous tips, surveillance notes, it's all here. The woman let the silence breathe before answering. Her voice was calm, clipped, each word sharpened to a blade. Your paperwork is fiction. The detective slammed a palm against the file, leaning in closer, crowding the space. You think you're smarter than us? You think you can walk into this city and push drugs like nobody's watching? Her gaze didn't flicker. I know what you've done. For words, delivered with such precision that the detective froze mid-sentence. For a moment, his practiced aggression cracked. He recovered quickly, scoffing, pulling another sheet from the folder, waving it in her face. Multiple witnesses saw drug activity at your address. Name one, she said, interrupting with surgical calm. He hesitated, eyes darting to the page as if the name might magically appear. Anonymous, he muttered. Anonymous sources don't exist in federal court. The word federal landed heavy in the room, echoing against the steel walls. The detective's jaw tightened, his hand curling into a fist on the table. Don't get cute with me. You're no lawyer. The woman's voice dropped lower, steady as stone. I don't have to be a lawyer to recognize a fabrication. You planted evidence in my home. You falsified reports. And now you're sitting here trying to intimidate me into confessing to crimes that don't exist. His fist hit the table hard, rattling the metal. Enough. You think anyone cares what you know? We own this station. We own this city. He leaned so close his breath hit her face. You have no idea what you're up against. For the first time that night, her lips curved, not in fear, but in something colder. Operation Clean House. The detective froze. The word sliced through the air like a blade. His face drained of color, his body suddenly rigid. What did you say? Operation Clean House. Her voice was steady, deliberate, unblinking. The detective pushed back from the table, his chair screeching against the floor. That's classified. That name isn't supposed to leave the room. Only federal investigators and their targets know it. Which was exactly her point. While the silence thickened in that gray room, across the city the secure line at FBI headquarters buzzed alive. Assistant Director James Rodriguez was already dressed, his secure phone pressed to his ear as he listened to Johnson's report. He stood in the operations center surrounded by glowing monitors and federal agents pulling on tactical gear. What's her status? He asked. Still in custody. They're processing her on possession charges. But the body cam proves the drugs were planted. Rodriguez's jaw tightened. Activate the team. Full federal response. The command vehicle roared to life, black SUVs lining up in convoy, red and blue lights muted until the signal came. Tactical units checked weapons, evidence specialists readied encrypted drives, communications officers locked onto police radio frequencies. For 18 months Diana Marshall had been their best undercover investigator, embedded quietly, building the corruption case brick by brick. Tonight, with one whispered codename in a dingy interrogation room, the entire operation was about to shift from shadows to daylight. Back in the station, the detective's confidence frayed. He paced the small space, pulling at his collar, muttering under his breath. "How do you know that name? Who told you?" Diana remained perfectly still, her eyes following him like a hawk watching prey tire itself out. "You've been under investigation for 2 years. Evidence planting. Civil rights violations. Conspiracy to obstruct justice. Every move you've made documented. Every file preserved." The words rolled out with calm inevitability. The detective stopped cold, staring at her as though seeing her for the first time. "You can't prove anything." She didn't need to answer. The truth was already in motion, moving toward the station in armored vehicles, carried by men and women who had been waiting for this moment as long as she had. Rodriguez's voice cut through the radio chatter in the convoy. "This is it. Tonight we close the book." Across the city the station glowed under harsh fluorescent lights, officers inside completely unaware that the walls around them were closing in. In interrogation room 3 the detective leaned back over the table, trying to summon his old authority, but his voice cracked when he spoke. "You don't scare me." Diana leaned forward just enough for the camera in the corner to catch every word. "You should be scared of yourself." At that moment the FBI convoy hit the streets leading to the station, tires gripping asphalt, engines humming in sync. Inside, Diana Marshall sat calm and unbroken, her words sharper than any weapon. The net was tightening. And she was the one who had cast it. The first streaks of dawn crept across the horizon, soft gold against a city still half asleep. But at the Metro Police Station the night was far from over. Black SUVs rolled in silently, engines low, tires grinding gravel, headlights cutting through the gray. One by one they stopped at every entrance, doors swinging open in perfect unison. Tactical teams fanned out, black jackets marked in gold, weapons ready but lowered, their discipline sharp as a blade. The red strobes flashed once, twice, then settled into a steady pulse that painted the walls of the station in warning. Inside, officers were still moving through the motions of a long night. Paperwork stacked high, radios crackling, coffee cups half full. None of them expected the sudden silence that fell when the front doors swung wide. Assistant Director James Rodriguez walked in first. His presence filled the lobby before his words ever reached the air. Behind him, framed by the rising sun, Diana Marshall stepped into view. No longer cuffed, no longer a suspect. Her FBI jacket draped across her shoulders, gold letters blazoned like a verdict before she even spoke. For a single breath the station froze, every head turning, every conversation cut mid-sentence. It was as if time itself had been caught off guard. Rodriguez's voice carried like thunder, deliberate and absolute. "This facility is now under federal jurisdiction. All personnel will comply immediately." His words hit like a gavel strike. Officers at desks froze with pens in hand. 2 men by the hallway instinctively raised their hands, caught in the moment between habit and fear. The detective who had led the raid stumbled back a step, his face draining of color. Diana moved beside Rodriguez, her eyes sweeping the room, not with vengeance but with calculation. She was not the one on trial here. She was the judge bringing the trial to them. Rodriguez pointed toward the first group, his voice sharper now. "Detective Morrison, step forward." Morrison's body stiffened, his knuckles widening around the file he held. "You are under arrest for evidence tampering, false imprisonment, and conspiracy to deprive citizens of constitutional rights. Each charge rolled out with precision, the kind of words that strip rank, uniform, and illusion of authority in a single breath. Morrison tried to protest, his voice cracking. "This is insane. We're police officers." But his words sounded hollow against the weight of federal law. Rodriguez ignored the protest, turning his gaze to another. "Sergeant Bradley. 22 counts of evidence planting. 31 falsified arrest reports. Conspiracy to obstruct justice." Bradley's legs buckled slightly, the weight of his crimes dragging him down before the handcuffs ever touched his wrists. Finally, Rodriguez faced the man at the top of the chain. "Captain Wilson. Conspiracy to operate a criminal enterprise under color of law. Systematic violation of constitutional rights." Wilson's lips parted, but no sound emerged. His eyes darted toward Diana, as though pleading for some trace of mercy. But Diana gave none. She held his gaze steady, the same calm she had carried when they kicked in her door. Only now the balance had shifted. The silence between them was louder than any accusation. Around the room, the atmosphere cracked. Some officers looked away, shame flickering across their faces. Others stood rigid, fear locking their bodies in place. A few reached for radios, only to find them jammed, static filling the air. The FBI had sealed every exit, every channel, every excuse. What remained was the truth, laid bare in daylight. Diana stepped forward then, her voice clear, precise, cutting through the paralysis. "For 15 years I documented your crimes. Every illegal search. Every planted charge. Every civil rights violation." Her hand rose, holding her encrypted phone, the screen glowing with years of evidence files. 2,000 hours of surveillance. 300 recorded conversations. 67 documented plantings of evidence. Each number dropped into the silence like a hammer strike, impossible to deny, impossible to erase. Rodriguez took the phone, raising it so all could see. "This device holds every violation, backed up on federal servers. Tonight's bodycam footage alone is enough to end careers, to end freedom." He turned toward Morrison, "Bradley, Wilson. You thought you arrested her. In truth, she just arrested you." The words broke whatever illusion of control the room still held. Federal agents surged forward, handcuffs snapping shut on wrists that had once snapped them on others. Desks rattled as chairs scraped back. Officers who had strutted with arrogance now slumped in defeat, their uniforms no shield against the weight of law. Diana watched it unfold without triumph, only with the calm certainty of someone who had waited too long for this moment. Morrison's voice rose once more, desperate, cracking under the weight of inevitability. "We were just doing our jobs." Diana faced him directly, her voice like iron. "Planting drugs isn't police work. It's criminal conspiracy." She played the recording from her phone, his voice echoing in the room. "Look what we have here." The sound of the baggie being pulled from her purse. Then her own voice, steady as stone. "I watched you plant it." The recording replayed their corruption in their own voices, leaving no doubt, no escape. For a long moment, silence filled the station, broken only by the click of handcuffs and the shuffle of feet. Then Rodriguez spoke again, his tone final. "Federal charges will be filed within 24 hours. This department is finished." The words settled like dust after an explosion, heavy and irreversible. Diana looked across the room, her eyes steady on every face. She was no longer the woman dragged from her home at night, no longer the victim of planted evidence. She was the reckoning they had never seen coming. And as the sun rose higher, spilling light through the station windows, the truth was no longer in the shadows. Justice had walked through the front doors. And it wore her jacket. 6 months later the federal courthouse pulsed with anticipation. Reporters filled the hallways, cameras flashing as spectators lined the benches inside the main chamber. The trial had been called the corruption case of the decade, a reckoning years in the making. At the prosecution's table Diana Marshall sat with her files stacked neatly, every document, every recording, every body cam clip preserved and ready. Across the room the defendants waited in orange jumpsuits instead of uniforms, their badges gone, their authority stripped away. Morrison's face was pale, Bradley's hands shook, Wilson stared straight ahead, his jaw locked tight. The jury filed in, eyes heavy with the weight of months of testimony. The foreman carried folded papers like they were stone tablets. But before the verdicts came, there was one more witness to hear. Officer Sarah Johnson rose from her seat. She walked slowly to the stand, each step echoing louder in her chest than in the marble courtroom. Morrison's eyes followed her, cold and sharp, a silent threat that tried to drag her back into silence. Bradley shook his head at her like an older brother scolding a child. Wilson simply narrowed his gaze, the unspoken reminder of loyalty betrayed. Johnson raised her hand, swore the oath, and began. Her voice trembled at first, but steadied with every sentence. She described the night of the raid, the planted drugs, the order to delete the footage. She told the court how she chose instead to upload it to federal servers. She told them the truth. Her eyes flicked once toward Diana at the table, and for a moment she felt strength flow back into her. Morrison leaned forward, whispering something to his lawyer, but it was too late. The jury had seen the video. They had heard his voice on the recording. There was no undoing what had been captured. Then came Diana's turn. She rose with quiet authority, holding the encrypted phone that had become her arsenal. She walked the jury through every major violation, each one supported by years of documentation. She spoke not with fire but with precision, her tone calm, professional, devastating. She reminded them of every illegal entry, every false report, every life destroyed by lies. She named the cases, the victims, the statutes. By the time she finished, the room was silent except for the scratching of pens. The judge's gavel struck once. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman rose. We have, Your Honor. The words rolled out like thunder. On the charge of conspiracy to violate civil rights under color of law, we find the defendant Morrison guilty. On the charge of evidence tampering, guilty. On the charge of false imprisonment, guilty. Each word echoed through the chamber, breaking whatever fragments of denial still clung to the air. Bradley was found guilty of obstruction and false reports, sentenced to 12 years. Wilson, guilty of conspiracy to operate a criminal enterprise, 15 years. Morrison, the face of their corruption, 20. Gasps rippled through the audience, followed by the hum of whispers, then the loud burst of cameras clicking. Outside, crowds had gathered with signs demanding reform. Some cheered at the verdicts, others wept, the release of years of anger finally finding its outlet. The courthouse steps became a stage for the public's voice, a reminder that justice did not end in the courtroom but spilled into the streets. Diana stepped out into the sunlight, her jacket collar turned up against the wind, reporters swarming around her with questions. How long did this take? 15 years, she answered calmly. 15 years of documentation, patience, and courage. What message does this send? She paused, considering, then spoke with words that would land on front pages across the nation. Justice isn't fast, but it is certain. Truth doesn't disappear. It waits for the right moment to surface. Johnson emerged behind her, no longer hiding, no longer silent. She had testified, chosen conscience over loyalty, and though her career in the department was over, she had been offered a place on a federal task force. Diana stopped to shake her hand. You made the right choice. Johnson's eyes filled with something close to relief. You gave me the chance. Diana shook her head. You gave it to yourself. The sun hung higher now, warming the courthouse steps. The verdict had landed, but Diana knew the mission was not over. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, Rodriguez on the line. Immigration detention facilities, he said. Systematic abuse. We need someone who can build it piece by piece, the way you did here. Diana glanced back at the courthouse, the crowd, the reporters shouting her name. Then she looked forward. I'll take it. Because justice never rests. Corruption never ends. And Diana Marshall was not done. She was only moving to the next battlefield, carrying with her the same patience, the same persistence, the same unshakable truth. The trial was over, but the work continued. Justice served once, and ready to be served again. If you enjoyed this story, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories.